David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 13, The Sequel of My Resolution. I sat down on a doorstep, quite spent and exhausted, and with hardly breath enough to cry for the loss of my box and half-guinea. It was by this time dark. I heard the clock strike 10 as I sat resting, but it was a summer night, fortunately, and fine weather. When I had recovered my breath and had got rid of a stifling sensation in my throat, I rose up and went on. I trudged on miserably, though as fast as I could, until I happened to pass a little shop, where it was written up that ladies' and gentlemen's wardrobes were bought, and that the best price was given for rags, bones, and kitchen stuff. The master of this shop was sitting at the door in his shirt-sleeves, smoking, and as there were a great many coats and pairs of trousers dangling from the low ceiling, and only 2 feeble candles burning inside to show what they were, I fancied that he looked like a man of a revengeful disposition, who had hung all his enemies and was enjoying himself. My late experiences with Mr. and Mrs. Micawber suggested to me that here might be a means of keeping off the wolf for a little while. I went up the next by-street, took off my waistcoat, rolled it neatly under my arm, came back to the shop door. "If you please, sir," I said, "I am to sell this at a fair price." Mr. Dolloby was the name of the shop owner at least, took the waistcoat, stood his pipe on its head against the doorpost, went into the shop, followed by me, snuffed the 2 candles with his fingers, spread the waistcoat on the counter, and looked at it there, held it up against the light. And looked at it there, and ultimately said, "What do you call a price now for this here waistcoat?" "Oh, you know best, sir," I returned modestly. "I can't be buyer and seller too," said Mr. Dolloby. "Put a price on this here little waistcoat." "Would 18 pence be?" I hinted, with some hesitation. Mr. Dolloby rolled it up again and gave it me back. "I should rob my family," he said, "if I was to offer 9 pence for it." This was a disagreeable way of putting the business, because it imposed upon me, a perfect stranger, the unpleasantness of asking Mr. Dolloby to rob his family on my account. My circumstances being so very pressing, however, I said I would take 9 pence for it if he pleased. Mr. Dolloby, not without some grumbling, gave 9 pence. I wished him good-bye and walked out of the shop, the richer by that sum and the poorer by a waistcoat. I had had a hard day's work, and was pretty well jaded when I came climbing out at last upon the level of Blackheath. I found a haystack, and I lay down by it. Never shall I forget the lonely sensation of first lying down without a roof above my head. Sleep came upon me as it came upon many other outcasts, against whom house doors were locked and house dogs barked that night, until the warm beams of the sun awoke me. I crept away and struck into the long, dusty track, which I had first known to be the Dover Road, when I little expected that any eyes would ever see me the wayfarer I was now upon it. I got that Sunday through 23 miles on the straight road, though not very easily, for I was new to this kind of toil. I see myself as evening closes in, coming over the bridge at Rochester, footsore and tired, and eating bread that I had bought for supper. 1 or 2 little houses with the notice "Lodgings for Travelers" hanging out had tempted me, but I was afraid of spending the few pence I had, and was even more afraid of the vicious looks of the trampers I had met or overtaken. I sought no shelter, therefore, but the sky, and toiling into Chatham, upon a sort of grass-grown battery overhanging a lane, slept soundly until morning. Feeling that I could go but a very little way that day, I resolved to make the sale of my jacket its principal business. Accordingly, I took the jacket off, that I might learn to do without it, and, carrying it under my arm, began a tour of inspection of the various slop shops. It was a likely place to sell a jacket in, for the dealers in second-hand clothes were numerous, and were, generally speaking, on the lookout for customers at their shop doors. At last I found one that I thought looked promising, at the corner of a dirty lane. Into this shop, which was low and small, and which was darkened rather than lightened by a little window overhung with clothes, and which was descended into by some steps, I went with a palpitating heart. which was not relieved when an ugly old man, with the lower part of his face all covered with a stubby gray beard, rushed out of a dirty den behind it, seized me by the hair of my head. He was a dreadful old man to look at, in a filthy flannel waistcoat, and smelling terribly of rum. His bedstead, covered with a tumbled and ragged piece of patchwork, was in the den he had come from, where another little window showed a prospect of more stinging nettles and a lame donkey. "Oh, what do you want?" grinned this old man in a fierce, monotonous whine. "Oh, my eyes and limbs, what do you want? Oh, my lungs and liver, what do you want? Oh, guru, guru." I was so much dismayed by these words, and particularly by the repetition of the last unknown one, which was a kind of rattle in his throat, that I could make no answer. Hereupon the old man, still holding me by the hair, repeated, "Oh, what do you want? Oh, my eyes and limbs, what do you want? Oh, my lungs and liver, what do you want? Oh, guru," which he screwed out of himself with an energy that made his eyes start in his head. "I wanted to know," I said, trembling, "if you would buy a jacket." "Oh, let's see the jacket," cried the old man. "Oh, my heart is on fire. Show the jacket to us. Oh, my eyes and limbs, bring the jacket out." With that, he took his trembling hands, which were like the claws of a great bird, out of my hair, and put on a pair of spectacles, not at all ornamental, to his inflamed eyes. "Oh, how much for the jacket?" cried the old man, after examining it. "Oh, guru, how much for the jacket?" "Half a crown," I answered, recovering myself. "Oh, my lungs and liver," cried the old man. "Oh, my eyes, no. Oh, my limbs, no. 18 pence, guru." Every time he uttered this ejaculation, his eyes seemed to be in danger of starting out, and every sentence he spoke he delivered in a sort of tune, always exactly the same, and more like a gust of wind which begins low, mounts up high, and falls again, then again without comparison, and falls again than any other comparison I can find for it. "Well," I said, glad to have closed the bargain, "I'll take 18 pence. "Oh, my liver!" cried the old man, throwing the jacket on a shelf. "Get out of my shop! Oh, my lungs, get out of my shop! Oh, my eyes and limbs, guru! Don't ask for money. Make it an exchange." I was never so frightened in my life before or since, but I told him humbly that I wanted money, and that nothing else was of any use to me, but that I would wait for it if he desired, outside, and I had no wish to hurry him. So I went outside, sat down in the shade in a corner, and I sat there so many hours that the shade became sunlight, and the sunlight became shade again, and still I sat there waiting for the money. There never was another drunken madman in that line of business. There never was such another drunken madman in that line of business, I hope, that he was well known in the neighborhood and enjoyed the reputation of having sold himself to the devil. I soon understood from the visits he received from the boys who continually came skirmishing about the shop, shouting that legend and calling him to bring out his gold. "You ain't Paul, you know, Charlie. You just pretend. Bring out your gold. Bring out some of the gold you sold yourself to the devil for. Come up, come. It's in the lining of the mattress, Charlie. Rip it open, and let's have some." This and many others, to lend him a knife for the purpose, exasperated him to such a degree that the whole day was a succession of rushes on his part and flights on the part of the boys. He made many attempts to induce me to consent to exchange, at one time coming out with a fishing rod, at another with a fiddle, at another with a cocked hat, and another with a flute. But I resisted all these overtures, and sat there in desperation, each time asking him, with tears in my eyes, for the money or my jacket. At last he began to pay me a halfpence at a time, and was full 2 hours getting by easy stages to a shilling. "Oh, my eyes and limbs," he then cried, peeping hideously out of the shop after a long pause. "Will you go for 2 pence more?" "I can't," I said. "I shall be starved." "Oh, my lungs and liver, will you go for 3 pence?" "I would go for nothing, if I could," I said, "but I want the money badly." "Oh, guru!" It is really impossible to express how he twisted this ejaculation out of himself as he peeped round the doorpost at me, showing nothing but his crafty old head. "Will you go for 4pence?" I was so faint and weary that I closed with this offer, and taking the money out of his claw, not without trembling, went away more hungry and thirsty than I had ever been a little before sunset. But at an expense of 3pence, I soon refreshed myself completely, and, being in better spirits then, limped 7 miles upon my road. My bed at night was under another haystack, where I rested comfortably, after having washed my blistered feet in a stream and dressed them as well as I was able with some cool leaves. I took the road again next morning through a succession of hop grounds and orchards. The trampers were worse than ever that day, and inspired me with a dread that is yet quite fresh in my mind. Some of them were most ferocious-looking ruffians, who stared at me as I went by, and stopped perhaps, and called after me to come back and speak to them, and when I took to my heels, stoned me. I recollect one young fellow, a tinker, I suppose, from his wallet and brassiere, who had a woman with him, and who faced about, stared at me thus, and then roared at me in such a tremendous voice to come back that I halted and looked round. "Come back here when you're called," said the tinker, "or I'll rip your young body open." I thought it best to go back. As I drew nearer to them, trying to propitiate the tinker by my looks, I observed that the woman had a black eye. "Where are you going?" said the tinker, gripping the bosom of my shirt with his blackened hand. "I am going to Dover," I said. "Where do you come from?" said the tinker, giving his hand another turn in my shirt to hold me more securely. "I come from London," I said. With his disengaged hand he made a menace of striking me, and then looked at me from head to foot. "Have you got the price of a pint of beer about you?" said the tinker. "If you have, out with it afore I take it away." I should certainly have produced it, but then I met the woman's look and saw her very slightly shake her head and form "no" with her lips. "I am very poor," I said, attempting to smile, "and have got no money." "Why, what do you mean?" said the tinker, looking so sternly at me that I almost feared he saw the money in my pocket. "Sir," I stammered. "What do you mean?" said the tinker. "By wearing my brother's silk handkerchief. Give it over here." And he had mine off my neck in a moment and tossed it at the woman. The woman burst into a fit of laughter, as if she thought this a joke, and tossed it back to me, nodded once as slightly as before, and made the word "go" with her lips. Before I could obey, however, the tinker seized the handkerchief out of my hand with a roughness that threw me away like a feather, and putting it loosely round his own neck, turned upon the woman with an oath and knocked her down. I shall never forget seeing her fall backward on the hard road and lie there with her bonnet tumbled off and her hair all whitened in the dust, nor, when I looked back from a distance, seeing her sitting on the pathway, which was a bank by the roadside, wiping the blood from her face with a corner of her shawl, while he went on ahead. This adventure frightened me so that afterwards, when I saw any of these people coming, I turned back until I could find a hiding place, where I remained until they had gone out of sight, which happened so often that I was very seriously delayed. I came at last upon the bare, wide downs near Dover, and I actually set foot in the town itself on the 6th day of my flight, and we will pause there.